The deadliest ground of the American Revolution was not a battlefield. It was a fleet of rotting ships anchored in a mudflat off the shore of Brooklyn. More Americans died there than fell in every battle of the war combined, and most of them have no names. Each morning, the guards called down through the locked hatches with the same words, "Rebels, turn out your dead." The prison ships of Wallabout Bay. In the late summer of 1776, the British took New York. After the Battle of Long Island and the collapse of Washington's defenses, captured Americans flooded a city with nowhere to put them. Its churches, its sugar houses, its jails filled and overflowed. The Crown's answer floated just offshore. They took old warships and transports, stripped them of their masts and rigging, and anchored them as floating prisons in Wallabout Bay, a sheltered curve of the East River on the Brooklyn shore, where the Navy Yard would one day rise. The Whitby opened the system in 1776. Others followed, the Good Hope, the Scorpion, the Falmouth. But from the spring of 1780 until the British sailed away in 1783, one hulk gathered to herself a reputation worse than all the rest, the Old Jersey. She had once been a 64-gun ship of the line. Now she was a dismasted hulk that the prisoners simply called Hell. Authority over the captives ran through a handful of names the survivors never forgave. David Sproat, the Loyalist commissary of naval prisoners, Joshua Loring, who handled the Army's captives, and the Provost Marshal William Cunningham. A small crew and a rotating guard of Loyalists and Hessians ruled a population that, packed below, outnumbered them many times over.
There, rebels, there is the cage for you.
The Jersey's gun ports were caulked shut. Air and light reached the prisoners only through 2 rows of small holes cut in her sides, 20 inches square and crossed with iron bars. By day, the men were let up onto the spar deck in managed groups. At sunset, they were driven below, and the heavy gratings were locked down over their heads.
At sunset, our ears were saluted with the insulting and hateful sound from our keepers of "Down, rebels, down." And we were hurried below.
Below decks, food and water were instruments of attrition. The rations were nominally 2/3 of a sailor's allowance, but in practice, they were often condemned Navy stores. Beef boiled in a great copper kettle with the brackish water of the East River, and biscuit so riddled with weevils it crumbled to powder in the hand.
The bread had been so eaten by weevils that one might easily crush it in the hand and blow it away. The beef was exceedingly salt, and scarcely a particle of fat could be seen upon it.
Water was scarcer still, and what little there was sickened the men who drank it.
The best which was ever afforded us was very brackish, but that from the ship's hold was nauseous in the highest degree.
But it was disease that did most of the killing. Overcrowding, sealed nighttime holds, fouled air, and fouler water bred epidemics. Smallpox, dysentery, typhus, yellow fever. There was no physician on board. When Thomas Dring, a master's mate from Providence, realized he had never had the smallpox in a hold where it now raged, he did the only thing he could.
As I had never had the smallpox, it became necessary that I should be inoculated. And there being no proper person on board to perform the operation, I concluded to act as my own physician.
His only instrument was a common pin. He scratched the infected matter into his own hand and bound it up. Around him, through the long sealed nights, the dying never stopped.
There were continual noises during the night. The groans of the sick and the dying, the curses poured out by the weary and exhausted upon our inhuman keepers, mingled with the wild and incoherent ravings of delirium.
Each morning, the dead of the night were hauled up from below, lowered into boats, and rowed ashore. There they were buried in shallow trenches scratched into the sand of the Wallabout. graves so shallow that, for decades afterward, the bones would wash out of the bank with every storm and every tide. And yet the prisoners were not broken. They organized their own messes, policed their own ranks, and, under constant pressure to save themselves by enlisting in the Royal Navy, overwhelmingly refused. The starkest day of their defiance came on the 4th of July, 1782, the 6th anniversary of the independence they were dying for. That morning, the men strung 13 small national flags along the ship's booms and began to sing.
13 little national flags were displayed in a row upon the booms. We were soon ordered by the guard to take them away, and as we neglected to obey the command, they triumphantly demolished and trampled them underfoot.
The guards drove the prisoners below 3 hours early and denied them their evening ration of water. Still, the singing went on. And so, after dark, the keepers came down among them.
At about 9 o'clock, the gratings were removed, and the guards descended among us, with lanterns and drawn cutlasses in their hands, cutting and wounding every one within their reach.
Through a sweltering, waterless night, the wounded lay untended in the dark, their groans, Dring wrote, dreadful in the extreme. It was, in its way, a battle, fought with nothing but the refusal to be silent. How many died on the ships? The terrible truth is that no one knows, and no one ever will. No British death register for the prison ships survives. Every total is an estimate, and the most famous number of all is less a count than an act of memory. The monument in Brooklyn names 11,500 dead. That figure is commemorative, carried down from the 19th century and carved in stone. The most cited analytical estimate for the ships alone runs from 8 to 12,000. And the historian Edwin Burrows, widening the frame to every British prison in and around New York, reached the broadest figure of all.
Evidence suggests that at least 17,500 Americans may have died in these prisons, more than twice the number to die on the battlefield.
Set those against the battle dead. The Department of Defense counts 4,435 Americans killed in action in the whole revolution. The scholar Howard Peckham, tallying more than 1,300 engagements, reached 6,824. By every figure we have, the prison ships of a single bay killed more men than all the battles of the war. Even the lowest estimate for the ships exceeds the highest count of the slain. So why did so many die? Not only from squalor, but from policy. 3 failures kept men aboard those ships until the ships killed them. The first was legal. Britain did not recognize the United States as a nation, and so could treat captured Americans, above all the privateersmen who preyed on British trade, not as prisoners of war, but as rebels and pirates, outside any cartel of exchange. The second failure was the deadlock over that very recognition. To exchange prisoners formally, nation to nation, was to admit the nation existed. Washington's own commissioners reported the British position from the table.
Sir Henry Clinton has no power to treat of the subject of prisoners on national ground, and he will, of course, avoid an exchange altogether, rather than go into a measure of this nature.
The third failure was simple neglect. Washington had set a humane standard from the very start, demanding that captives in American hands be treated with mercy and reciprocity in return.
It is not my wish that severity should be exercised towards any whom the fortune of war has thrown into our hands. On the contrary, it is my desire that the utmost humanity should be shewn them.
American agents smuggled food and money out to the ships. Men like Elias Boudinot warned that British practice would make thousands inevitably perish. But the men dying in the Wallabout were the very seamen the impasse was about. And so the impasse held, and they went on dying, while the diplomats argued over a word. Because the official record is silent, Almost everything we know of the ships comes from the men who survived them and one poet who nearly didn't. They wrote, most of them decades later, often to support a pension claim. Yet they agree, independently, on the smallest details, and that agreement is what makes the picture hold. Thomas Dring gave us the fullest account. Ebenezer Fox, a runaway apprentice, gave us a livelier one. Andrew Sherburne, a New Hampshire teenager, published among the earliest. And as far back as 1778, an escaped prisoner named Robert Sheffield reached a Connecticut newspaper with one of the first exposés of the ships, atrocity reported while the war still raged. Towering over the prose is Philip Freneau, the poet of the American Revolution, himself captured at sea in 1780 and held on the prison ship Scorpion and the hospital ship Hunter. He turned the experience into a poem of 4 cantos. Its lines fix the horror in a form the memoirs never could.
Now toward the Hunter's black abode we came, a slaughterhouse, yet hospital in name. Each day at least 3 carcasses we bore, and scratched them graves along the sandy shore.
And of the men who ran the ships, he wrote only this, that they conspired to murder those they could not subdue. Among the thousands aboard the Jersey in 1781 was a boy of about 15, a free black Philadelphian named James Forten, who had served as a powder boy on the American privateer Royal Louis. When his ship was taken, Forten faced the fate that captured black sailors dreaded most of all. Not the prison ship, but sail into slavery in the West Indies. By the story handed down, the British captain's own son took a liking to him, and Forten was offered a way out, passage to England, and a comfortable life, if only he would change sides. He refused. The words remembered for him, recalled long afterward, were these:
I have been taken prisoner for the liberties of my country, and will never prove a traitor to her interest.
He survived some 7 months aboard and was freed in an exchange. He lived to become one of the wealthiest men in Philadelphia, of any color, a sailmaker, and one of the great abolitionists of his age, who put his fortune behind William Lloyd Garrison's Liberator. A boy who suffered on the Jersey for American liberty spent the rest of his life insisting that liberty be extended to all. The shallow graves of the Wallabout would not stay closed. For a generation, the bones kept surfacing along the shore, gathered by the people who lived and worked there. In 1808, the Tammany Society interred a great collection of the recovered remains in a vault near the Navy Yard, with a solemn procession through Brooklyn. The vault decayed. In 1873, the bones were moved again to the new Fort Greene Park. The permanent memorial came only in 1908. Designed by the architect Stanford White, the prison ship Martyrs Monument is a single Doric column rising nearly 150 feet above a granite stair with a crypt at its base, though the boxes of bones it holds are, in the city's own words, a mere fraction of the dead. On the 14th of November, before a crowd in the tens of thousands, the president-elect William Howard Taft gave the oration in the sleet.
We are met today to pay a nation's debt, long since recognized, but most tardily provided for.
And here is the strangest part of the whole story. The single, deadliest sight of the Revolution became its faintest memory. The reasons gathered like silt. It had no heroic arc, no Saratoga, no Yorktown, only attrition and anonymity and defeat. The dead were common sailors, low in the social order, their very bones mingled past any hope of a name. The evidence was testimonial and easy to doubt, and the place itself was erased. The Wallabout became the Brooklyn Navy Yard, torn down and built over, until almost nothing was left to remember it by. The historian who spent years recovering the story put it most plainly.
It is a mean, ugly story.
But there is a countercurrent, 2 centuries long. The bones gathered, the processions, the column, the slow insistence on remembering. Taft called it a debt most tardily provided for, The monument keeps that promise still. The revolution was won not only by the men who fired the famous volleys, but by thousands of nameless prisoners who chose to die in the dark of a rotting ship rather than turn their coats, and whose sacrifice the nation it made has only ever half remembered.